Many of us are not really very clear about the antiquity of the Indian civilization. Some of us consider that Indian civilization is one of the ancient civilizations of the world, and that is in fact. But some of us consider that this is the oldest civilization of the world. So there is a need to arrange the migration of the migration of anatomical modern human during the pre-recorded period, which direction to which direction they actually traveled along with their language and culture. And above all, there is a need for a multidisciplinary and scientific study to approach this subject. As the name of the book suggests, it is all about an intense connectivity between the Indian and the Egyptian civilization. In fact, I'm making an effort to establish that Egyptian civilization was established by the Indian origin people. In the meantime, during these 200 years of British education, what we have been taught may not encourage such a line of thinking. So this may appear unbelievable at this stage, but we have to keep in mind that what we have been taught may not be correct in every sense. Under the circumstances, my concept that Indian origin people traveled to distant lands and established other civilization may appear completely unbelievable. Generally, we consider, or rather we are taught that India is a melting pot and people have come to India from various directions, like Indo-Aryans have come with Indo-European language. Similarly, they have come from the West. More specifically, they have come from Europe. And on the other hand, Tibeto-Burman speakers and Austroasiatic speakers have come from the East. Whereas my hypothesis says that actually India has anatomical modern human is present in India since a very long period, that is since their arrival from Africa 65,000 years ago. So there is no need for anybody else to come to India because India was having the anatomical modern human settlement continuously for this long period. In fact, it could be other way around, that from India periodically they have traveled to other continents. That hypothesis suggests that Indian origin people had traveled to Mediterranean region long ago. It took me a very long period to understand that they actually traveled to Mediterranean region at a very early period, because we see that on the Mediterranean coast, the territories are known as cradle of civilization. These Sumer, Mesopotamia are considered as the oldest civilization. So these Indian origin people had reached actually those regions very early, and from there they went to Egypt and ancient Greece to establish Egyptian and Greek civilization. It is interesting to note that Kali possibly manifested as Black Athena in ancient Greece and Black Madonna in the rest of Europe. In fact, I'm just coming back. I was there in Greece some time ago, a couple of months ago. I was surprised to note that the greeting there is actually Kalimera. I mean, whenever in the morning we used to meet people, they used to we used to greet us with that Kalimera. And there are a lot of evidences which I'm going to arrange in my next book, that the Kali worshiping fraternity probably spread to ancient civilizations, including ancient Greece.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Indic Talks, organized by Center for Indic Studies, Indus University. Today, we will be talking about India in Egypt, Antiquity of Indian Civilization in New Perspective, which is a book that attempts to arrange the ground evidences of the Indian subcontinent to recreate the pre-recorded period of India. Views of anthropology, archaeology, culture, language, geophysiology, and genetics regarding the subcontinent have been assimilated in the presentation by our speaker today, Dr. Tilak Ranjan Bera ji, who has explored the Indian subcontinent for over 20 years to collect ground evidences to arrange pre-recorded period of India. He is a Fulbright Fellow and was in Yale University, US of A during his fellowship. I welcome you, sir, and I request you to take over from here.
Thank you. Good evening. Good evening to you all. I'm grateful to Indus University for giving me this opportunity to discuss about the pre-recorded period of India and that of the world. Many of us are not really very clear about the antiquity of the Indian civilization. Some of us consider that Indian civilization is one of the ancient civilizations of the world, and that is in fact. But some of us consider that this is the oldest civilization of the world. So there is a need to arrange the migration of the migration of anatomical modern human during the pre-recorded period, which direction to which direction they actually traveled along with their language and culture. And above all, there is a need for a multidisciplinary and scientific study to approach this subject. I have authored a book titled India in Egypt. Today, I'll be discussing the contents of this book in this presentation. As the name of the book suggests, it is all about an intense connectivity between the Indian and the Egyptian civilization. In fact, I'm making an effort to establish that Egyptian civilization was established by the Indian origin people. In the meantime, during this 200 years of British education, what we have been taught may not encourage such a line of thinking. So this may appear unbelievable at this stage, but we have to keep in mind that what we have been taught may not be correct in every sense. Under the circumstances, my concept that Indian origin people traveled to distant lands and established other civilization may appear completely unbelievable. Ground evidences, on the other hand, suggest that Indian origin people at some stage, that is during the post-glacial period, at the onset of the interglacial period, traveled from India to the Mediterranean region, and they actually established other ancient civilizations of the world like Sumer, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Greece. Presently, we are approaching this subject, that how old is the Indian civilization, by analyzing information available in each subject like anthropology, archaeology, genetics, history, ancient literature, and so on. This approach has its own limitations. Like the historians or archaeologists may not have clear idea about the genetic data of the world population. So they may not be able to arrange which fraternity traveled at which period from which place to which place. As such, history is only 2,500 years old in relation to India. Whereas the archaeological evidences have confirmed that Indian civilization is at least 10,000 years old. So this prehistoric period remains literally undiscussed in any scientific forum. In my book, India in Egypt, I have thus taken a multidisciplinary approach, compiling information from all scientific subjects as well as from other subjects like our ancient texts like Rig Veda. I realize that we have to discuss about various subjects, various relevant subjects and all possible source to really understand the antiquity of the Indian civilization in a scientific manner. We have to actually make an effort to understand the events related to India, what has happened since the arrival of the anatomical modern human from Africa 65,000 years ago. I have written about the post-glacial period human migration from India in a completely different manner. But we have to base our discussion on the basis of available ground evidences, that whether those evidences are still available, whether we can arrange those evidences in a scientific manner. Evidences of each period of the development of the Indian civilization is well preserved in some form in some part of the Indian subcontinent. Genetics definitely plays a very, very important role because it provides a very specific information about the site of origin and the period of origin of a fraternity. If a genetic identity or a fraternity is found in one part of the world and the same genetic identity is found in some other part of the world, we have to consider a migration of that fraternity from place A to place B, whatever is the distance, and even if it appears unbelievable. Like in this map, we find that R1, this is a R1 Bravo haplogroup map, which is easily available in Google. And here we find that there are R1 Bravo pockets in India. And similar, whereas R1 Bravo concentration is much higher in Western Europe. But we have to consider that at some stage of history, these R1 Bravo has traveled from one place to the other. Now, it is our responsibility as Indians to collect ground evidences available in India and arrange them in a scientific manner and then present it to the global community. Professor Suniti Kumar Chatterjee, a world-famous linguist, had authored a book titled India and Ethiopia, because Ethiopia has a lot of Sanskrit words in their names and in their literature. Now, here we find in this map that R1 Bravo is present, is scattered from in India as well as in Ethiopia. So this map provides us a scientific explanation of this puzzling linguistic observation. Similarly, very recently, there are a lot of studies that French language has got similarity with Indian language. Again, is another puzzle, because Bengal is located, French language has got similarity with Bengali language. Now, Bengal is located on the eastern end of the Indian subcontinent, and France is located on the western end of Europe. So this is a puzzle. So far, this is a puzzle, but this genetic map, when we analyze, we find that same R1 Bravo is present in Bengal location on the east coast of India, and it is present in very high concentration in France. Now we have to arrange when and how did these genetic identity reach from one place to the other. Firstly, whether it went from India to France or it came from France to India, and then in which route it reached, because this map confirms it's in a scientific manner that there has to be an ethnic connectivity because there is a genetic connectivity between these two territories. Generally, we consider, or rather we are taught, that India is a melting pot and people have come to India from the various directions. Like Indo-Aryans have come with Indo-European language. Similarly, they have come from the West. More specifically, they have come from Europe. And on the other hand, Tibeto-Burman speakers and Austroasiatic speakers have come from the East. Whereas my hypothesis says that actually India has anatomical modern human is present in India since a very long period. That is, since their arrival from Africa 65,000 years ago. So there is no need for anybody else to come to India, because India was having the anatomical modern human settlement continuously for this long period. In fact, it could be other way around, that from India, periodically, they have traveled to other continents. These general idea that India is a melting pot is applicable when we consider events of the last 2,000 to 3,000 years, that is the reverse migration period. That my point is that this Indo-Aryan migration is not the primary migration. This is a reverse migration of the Indian origin fraternities. Much before that, Indian origin people had traveled to the Western world. Maybe R1 Bravo has traveled about 10,000 years ago, and R1 Alpha has traveled about 6,000 years ago. So we have to understand that India was not really a melting pot. It is a melting pot when we consider only the last 3,000 to 4,000 years. We are anatomical modern human, or scientifically known as Homo sapiens. Now, anatomical modern human originated in Africa about 2 lakh years ago. And then they came out of Africa. I'm not going into the details of how many times they came out of Africa, because the fossils are found in various region in different, which belong to different periods. But let us discuss about the last out of Africa migration, which took place about 65,000 years ago, because they have actually survived out of Africa. And this out of Africa migration, these fraternity followed great coastal migration. They traveled along the coast and reached India about 65,000 years ago. We have definite evidence of pre-glacial period population settlement in India. That is, in Andamans, we find these pre-glacial period fraternities, which are genetically M31 and M32 mtDNA haplogroups. Now, they are definitely found in Andaman, indicating that, and then they have two groups. One group, probably Jaroange Sentinelese, belong to an older period, that is, they have entered Andaman about 40 to 50,000 years ago. And the next group, that is Great Andamanis, have entered Andaman much later. Now we have to think about how did they go there. Obviously, 40 to 50,000 years ago, they have not traveled by ship or by air the way we travel now. They could go to only those places where they could walk. They could reach by walking. Here also, we have to consider that they have walked into Andaman territory, Andaman archipelago, at some geographical period when a land bridge forms between Bengal coast and Andaman. And similarly, we see a large number of dark complexion tribes south of Vindhya Parbat. Who are these people? Why these dark complexion tribes are not there in North India or even Northeast India as such? In Northeast India, we consider that a lot of tribes are there, but these dark complexion tribes are not found in Northeast India. These dark complexion tribes are not found anywhere else in entire Eurasia. Now, who are these people? They are a very important anatomical modern human. Possibly they belong to pre-glacial period or early post-glacial period. So we have to, this indicates that almost continuously anatomical modern human lived in India in some part or the other. And definitely Andaman tribes are pre-glacial period genetic identities. And we also have to form an idea that post-glacial period genetic identities like R1 alpha, R1 bravo, and O haplogroup possibly formed on the Bengal Andaman coast during the last glacial period. When we analyze these ground evidences, I'm discussing the ground evidences that we can see the tribes in Andaman. We have to explain how did they reach there, and we have to explain to which period they belong. That will give us an idea that Indian population, whether the Indian population originated from these people who are present in our country. Now, when we arrange all these things, a completely new narrative of the migration of the post-glacial period genetic identities emerges, which we are trying to discuss. Now, that hypothesis suggests that Indian origin people had traveled to Mediterranean region long ago. It took me a very long period to understand that they actually traveled to Mediterranean region at a very early period, because we see that on the Mediterranean coast, the territories are known as cradle of civilization. These Sumer, Mesopotamia are considered as the oldest civilization. So these Indian origin people had reached actually those regions very early, and from there they went to Egypt and ancient Greece to establish Egyptian and Greek civilization. Now we know that Egyptian civilization, though is located in Egypt, but they were not created by the African people, though Egyptian civilization was in Africa. But they were not created by the African origin people. Who were these people? Where from they have come? They had actually come from India. It took me 20 years of extensive exploration of the entire Indian subcontinent to to collect ground evidences. I had explored many remote regions like Northeast India, Upper Indus Valley, and pre-Portuguese Goa, Andaman, Nicobar to collect ground evidences for almost 20 years. And I have authored several books. I have authored books only about those regions which are not, whose informations are not easily available. Now, this Goa book is actually, the important part is pre-Portuguese Goa. Portuguese Goa is easily available. And the most important is actually the evidences are scattered not only within the territory of India, but also in the in other parts of Indian subcontinent. Like I had to extensively travel in Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka to collect evidences. When I explored Northeast India, I found some very interesting findings, interesting data that which prompted me to consider that Indian civilization had a very intense connectivity with the Mediterranean region. In Tejpur, Assam, I found Hellenistic art or ancient Greek art in a 6th century Dahaparvatiya temple. Then Ahoms created their ancestral memorials known as Maidems, which are structurally and functionally very similar to the pyramids of Egypt. Then Israel gave visa to a number of Mesos in thousands after doing genetic matching that this Northeastern population or fraternity actually are one of the lost tribe of Israel. Now I got Israel, Greece, and Egypt. And then obviously, even the Manipuris also, they have followed a religion which is not regionally acquired. It had come from a long distance, I mean, from a distant place. All these prompted me to explore Mediterranean region. And first I explored Egypt to see what are the evidences available at that end. And I found much more evidences than I expected. On return, I authored a book titled India in Egypt. Today we are discussing the contents discussed in that book. Now, thereafter, I have traveled extensively in the Mediterranean region, in Jordan, in Israel, in Turkey, and Greece. But in this book, we have particularly concentrated establishing a connectivity between Indian civilization and Egyptian civilization. To arrange this whole thing, I had to introduce a number of new concepts without which this could not be arranged. Like so far, we are not explaining how the Aboriginal tribes of Andaman reached there, the land bridge or their migration path. So to discuss that or to arrange that, I had to introduce a number of new concepts. That is the rising and lowering of seawater level during glacial and interglacial periods and formation of a land bridge connecting Bengal coast with Andaman archipelago. Then another concept was this Bengal glacial, during glacial period, a huge landmass surfaces between Bengal and Myanmar coast, which gets connected with Andaman. So we have to form these concepts to understand the events which took place during the pre-recorded period in India. Then this Bengal coast got submerged, displacing the fraternities settled there. Now they had to migrate and they adopted various animal symbols. And each animal symbol actually represent the one ethnic fraternity which adopted that particular animal symbol. Then the migration took place through various routes, one of which was definitely Trans-Himalayan migration pivoting Mount Kailash. I have physically traveled along many of the Himalayan rivers to collect ground evidences. Then the first fraternity which traveled from India to the Mediterranean region, they were matriarchal people. And that is why in all the ancient civilizations, we find matriarchal community reaching there first. And then in India, we had to form an idea about a temporary settlement zone and permanent settlement zone. In other words, entire India does not remain suitable for human habitation during glacial period. Part of India that is northern part of India becomes unsuitable for human habitation. Now, these are the concepts which we have to form to explain whatever has has been now available, like to explain the genetic data, that how India is divided into ancestral North Indian and South Indian. This concept is very important. And then finally, all these Indian origin people had settled in various territories of Mediterranean region, but at a later stage they actually returned. They returned for various reasons. Firstly, when the patriarchal culture emerged there, the matriarchal community returned. When Christianity became dominant there, non-Christian Hindu population returned. Similarly, when Islam became very prominent there, or very dominant there, another group of Indian origin people who were not willing to convert to Islam returned. So there were various reasons for the Indian origin community to return. This is referred to as reverse migration of the Indian origin fraternity in my book. Then it is possible from the evidences available in India to establish that they have come from two directions. Pali-speaking fraternity had come from Egypt, and the Sanskrit-speaking fraternity had come from Europe. Where they settled in India, where from which language dominated those regions, all these are available, but they are not generally discussed, or we have to really go into minute details to form this idea. I have discussed about all these issues in my book quite elaborately. It is not possible to elaborate each issue here because of the paucity of time. However, I would like to show you a video where I can explain exactly how I approach this subject. And yeah, then I will show you two videos. One is on this issue, that overall, how did I arrange this Indian connectivity of Indian civilization with Egypt? And the other one is, we have to, at this juncture, we have to understand what happened to the eastern coastal India. This is a very unique physical territory. We have to form a clear idea regarding the events which took place during the glacial and interglacial period in this region. The second video is about this region, the events related to Bengal Andaman coast. Please play the videos.
Though Indian civilization is discussed along with other ancient civilizations of the world, like the Sumerian, Mesopotamian, Egyptian and Greek civilizations, it could be much older than the rest. Presently, the Indian civilization is considered 5,000 years old, and its origin is explained linked with the Indo-Aryan migration. Discovery of several newer archaeological sites suggests that this civilization is at least 10,000 years old. It is also possible that the Indian civilization played the role of a mother in the origin of other ancient civilizations. AMH, or anatomically modern humans, scientifically known as Homo sapiens sapien, originated in Africa about 2 lakh years ago. They arrived in India tentatively 65,000 years ago. The presence of a large number of dark complexion tribes in India suggests the continuous survival of AMH here. Though AMH reached Europe and Northern Asia during every interglacial period, they could not survive there during the severe weather of glacial maximum and became extinct. Present population has reached there from India during the last interglacial period 10,000 years ago. During glacial period, a huge coastal landmass surfaces between the Bengal and Myanmar coast. At this time, the population of two distinct genetic territories, the Bengal coast and Southeast Asia, intermix, producing newer genetic identities like R1 alpha and R1 bravo haplogroup in Y chromosome. As the seawater gradually rises during the interglacial period, this coastal landmass submerges, displacing the settled population. They settled on the Bengal coast and adopted various animal symbols as their ethnic identity. The Naga, tiger, lion, elephant, fish, turtle, avian, primate, each animal symbol seen at various archaeological sites represented an Indian origin human fraternity. They eventually migrated following the Trans-Himalayan migration routes which bifurcated from Mount Kailash. About 10,000 years ago, R1 Bravo fraternity descended from Kailash and followed the Makran coast to reach Africa, where the Egyptian civilization developed. The Indus Valley civilization emerged on this route. Similarly, about 5,800 years ago, R1 Alpha fraternity migrated to Europe along with the spoken Sanskrit language. The migration path of the Bagh fraternity can be traced from Bagdogra in North Bengal, ascending along the Bagmati river and reaching the Baglung Kali temple in Nepal, and finally Baghdad in Mesopotamia across Mount Kailash. A number of localities named after Bagh in Afghanistan, like Baglan, Bagram. Baghdad is located on river Tigris, which also means Bagh in Bengali. Koch or the turtle fraternity migration path can be established from Bengal and Assam along river Jamuna of Bangladesh to reach Kailash. Incidentally, turtle is the Vahana of Jamuna, suggesting its migration along the river. As one descends along Indus from Kailash, one reaches Kutch of Gujarat and Kutchi district of Baluchistan. Following the Persian Gulf, one reaches the territory of Kassites in Mesopotamia, and finally the Koch fraternity emerges as Kushites in the Horn of Africa. It is possible that the Caspian Sea and Caucasus Mountains were so named as they were Koch fraternity settlements. It is likely that a matriarchal culture evolved on the Bengal coast at a very early date. During this period, goddesses became popular. Kali is known as Adi Shakti or primordial energy. It is likely that goddesses like Kali, Durga, Lakshmi, Saraswati, Monosha, which are extremely popular in Bengal, emerged during a matriarchal period when women were considered as the depository of knowledge, wealth and power. As the matriarchal community spread to Egypt, we find emergence of goddesses like Nat, Hathor and Isis in Egypt. Lieutenant Wilford, a British officer, wrote an article in the Asiatic Researches in 1794 where he established that the Nile River was known as the Kali River, and this is mentioned in the Padma Puran and Skanda Puran. Similarly, in Greece, Athena was very popular at the early stage of the establishment of the European civilization. Athens, the ancient city of Greece, derived its name from Athena, like Kolkata deriving its name from Kali. The Sphinx of Alexandria in Egypt guarding Pompeii's pillar complex appeared to me very similar to Durga, who is inseparably associated with the lion. In fact, Lieutenant Wilford mentioned in his article that the Sphinx name originated from the word Singhik, meaning Singho-like or associated with lion. I was overjoyed to read that Sphinx was associated with the word Shingho. Shingho is a typical Bengali word meaning lion. I was equally thrilled when I went to the Philae temple in Aswan in Egypt. I found typical brachycephalic faces and slanting eyes of Isis created on the temple pillars, remarkably similar to the faces of the deities of Bengal. On top of almost every pillar, lotus images have been sculpted, when lotus is not a natural flower of Egypt. Moreover, Isis is shown with a yellow complexion, very similar to Lakshmi or Sri of Bengal. At the entrance of the Edfu temple, a large image of falcon is bound to attract the attention of Indians. This mythical eagle is the associate of Horus in Egypt. Our Hori or Vishnu also has a strikingly similar mythical eagle popularly known as Godur as his Vahan. I wonder if Hori has manifested as Horus in Egypt, Ashur manifesting as Osiris and Sri as Isis. Interestingly, like our Ashur, Osiris is also green complexioned, a rather unusual color of the skin. The relative position of Nut and Jeb, two early deities of the Egyptian pantheon, appear to have a similarity with the composite image of Kali and Shiva of Bengal. Here, the deity Nut is placed over her consort Jeb, who lies on the ground like Shiva in Bengal. The names Jeb and Shiv are phonetically quite similar. Moreover, Nut is studded with stars and one of the manifestations of Kali is Tara, meaning stars. Kali is associated with the crematorium in India and Nut with the burial sites in Egypt. Interestingly, Nut and Jeb have two sons and two daughters very similar to Shiva and Durga of Bengal. In the second half of my book, I have discussed the evidences of reverse migration of the Indian origin fraternities from Egypt by different routes in different periods. The land route reverse migration took place along the Uttarapath and the Indus Valley civilization. We find the emergence of the reverse migration animal symbols like the lion, horse, boar and peacock along the Uttarapath. They are found all over the subcontinent, especially in the Indian Himalayas, Nepal, Bhutan, Tibetan Plateau, Bengal and Northeast India. A number of evidences identify the onward and reverse migration routes. I have seen two owners of a shop in Pokhara, Nepal. One was short with brachycephalic features, which is a typical feature of indigenous Indians, while the other was not only tall but had oligocephalic face, which is a typical feature of some regions of Europe. I have also seen Kali in Kamalasagar temple of Tripura draped in a white sari, suggesting her reverse migration nature. Over a period, the sea route reverse migration from the Red Sea region got established and extended to the Bay of Bengal as they were keen to reach the matriarchal territories of Gangaridi. The Prakrita-speaking fraternities returned back to Bengal at this stage. As the Bengali-speaking reverse migration fraternities settled in Bangladesh, their Bengali dialects were different. I realized that the reverse migration fraternities had settled in the northeast India since a very early period. During the land route migration period, they had come through Uttarapath along river Brahmaputra from Kailash. Many of them had settled in the higher reaches of the Himalayas like Monpas of Tawang, while some others descended to the Brahmaputra valley. The reverse migration fraternities from the Red Sea arrived later who settled in the region using two different routes. One fraternity from the Bay of Bengal ascended along the rivers of Bangladesh to settle in Assam and Tripura. Thus we find ancient Greek art, popularly known as Hellenistic art, in the 6th century Dahaparvatiya temple of Tejpur. In Kailasahar, Tripura, we find unusual huge rock-cut images of Shiva in the Unakoti complex. The other group entered the northeast Indian states from the east as they ascended along the river Iravati and Chindwin. The Ahoms reached along this route in the 13th century. The ancestral memorial of Ahoms in Choraidao are known as Maidems, which are miniature replica of the pyramids of Egypt. In fact, the oldest Egyptian pyramids were also known as Maidems. The Hebrew name of Egypt is Mirzaim. Mizos had been given visa by Israel as they were considered to be one of the lost tribes of Israel. One of the oldest Egyptian documents, Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, compiled at the beginning of the Christian era, mentions about the connectivity of the Red Sea and this region. There is a need to arrange the pre-recorded period of India based on available ground evidences. In that direction, I intend to start a discussion on several issues which need serious attention.
Play the second video.
Several ethnic fraternities adopted various animal symbols, and as they migrated from the east coast, they spread Indian languages to those distant lands. What was so special about the east coast of India where all these ethnic fraternities developed? Is it possible that newer AMH fraternities like R1 alpha and R1 bravo haplogroups in Y chromosome originated in this region? Unless we are able to establish the unique nature of the Bengal-Myanmar coast to justify the origin of these newer genetic identities, the discussion regarding migration of various ethnic fraternities from the east coast becomes baseless, and also the spread of Indian languages. Interestingly, R1 alpha haplogroup in Y chromosome genetic identity is found in the entire Indo-European language-speaking territory, extending from eastern India to western Europe. Thus, this entire territory is clearly linguistically and genetically continuous. Europe also has high percentage of R1 bravo haplogroup in Y chromosome genetic identity. These genetic identities found in various other regions of Asia, including India and Mesopotamia, and also in the Afro-Asian speaking Central Africa. Interestingly, an isolated pocket of this genetic identity is found on the east coast of India, which has not received the required attention so far. These isolated pockets need to be included while charting the early migration path of the fraternity. In fact, these isolated pockets could be their oldest settlements. Presently, it is believed that R1 alpha and R1 bravo haplogroups in Y chromosome both originated in Eastern Europe near the European steppe and Anatolia region. However, many scholars consider that the origin of R1 alpha in South Asia cannot be ruled out. In fact, Underhill, who conducted a widespread genetic analysis of the Indo-European speaking territory, marked a region near Gujarat as having the oldest R1 alpha and several Himalayan pockets where the concentration of R1 alpha is extremely high. This itself clashes with the hypothesis of European steppe as the site of origin of R1 alpha. A number of Aboriginal tribes live in the Andaman archipelago. However, there is very little discussion about who were these people, when and how did they reach there. The only possible explanation is that they walked into the Andaman archipelago from the Bengal-Myanmar coast when a land bridge formed. During the glacial maximum, the sea level subsides by about 400 feet or 130 meters, and the Bengal coastline recedes, connecting Andamans with the mainland. During glacial period, for several thousand years, a huge coastal landmass surfaces between the Bengal and Myanmar coast, which is referred to as the Bengal Glacial Coastal Shelf in this book. At this time, the population of two distinct genetic territories, the east coast of India and Southeast Asia, intermix. And this genetic union produces newer genetic identities like R1 alpha and R1 bravo haplogroups in Y chromosome. As the seawater gradually rises during the interglacial period, this coastal landmass submerges, displacing the settled population. They settled on the Bengal coast and adopted various animal symbols as their ethnic identity. To begin with, they were bare-bodied and were known as Nanga, who adopted the Naga or serpent as their ethnic symbol. It is possible that their mother goddess was Kali, who is also depicted bare-bodied. These early fraternities eventually migrated following the Trans-Himalayan migration routes pivoting Mount Kailash. The Indus Valley Civilization emerged on this route. They continued their journey and established the Egyptian and Greek civilizations. It is extremely crucial to establish the site of origin of R1 alpha and R1 bravo haplogroups in Y chromosome on the east coast of India 10,000 years ago, because that will provide us the direction of the migration of the post-glacial period AMH fraternities and also the reason for the spread of Indian language and culture. About 10,000 years ago, R1 bravo haplogroup in Y chromosome migrated to Africa, establishing the Egyptian civilization and spreading Pali language in the Mediterranean region. Similarly, about 5,800 years ago, R1 alpha haplogroup in Y chromosome migrated to Eastern Europe along with the spoken Sanskrit language.
Once again, I would like you to concentrate in this region because we have to understand the events which took place on the Bengal-Myanmar coast during the last glacial period between 15 and 25,000 years ago. We have to also appreciate that the post-glacial period genetic identities like R1 alpha, R1 bravo, and O haplogroup originated in this region during the last glacial period. Enormous quantity of ice formation in the north and south poles as well as in the Himalayas and Alps resulted in consumption of huge quantity of water from the nearby sea. That resulted in lowering of the sea level to 400 feet or 130 meters, resulting in appearance of these or emergence of these huge landmass in the Bengal-Myanmar coast, which got connected with the Andaman archipelago. Through this landmass, the pre-glacial period genetic identities like M31 and M32 mtDNA haplogroup reached Andaman. We have to scientifically explain the migration path of these Andaman fraternities. How did they reach there? So far, we have completely neglected these events, and thus we could not understand how the post-glacial period genetic identities formed in the Bengal coast. Now, this is a very important issue we have to establish to the global community, that because the pre-glacial period genetic identities lived in this region, this is the most suitable place for the origin of the post-glacial period genetic identities. After all, the baby will be born where their parents lived. So this is extremely important to establish that this is the most likely place for where the post-glacial period genetic identities emerged. Now, submersion, as the seawater increased because of melting of the ice, the Bengal glacial coastal shelf gradually submerged in three phases, displacing the settled population, that is R1 alpha, R1 bravo, and O haplogroup, which then came to the mainland. And some of them preferred to travel to long distance places, that is to towards Mediterranean Sea. And that is my explanation of how the Indian origin fraternities traveled from. Why is because their settlement actually got submerged and they had to migrate in mass scale. And then when they migrated, not only their genetic identity reached distant part of the world, they traveled along with their culture and language. So the Bengali language or the Proto-Indo-European language from Eastern India reached these regions, as well as their culture, that is their deities and their matriarchal culture. In this book, I have particularly compiled India and Egypt. I have particularly compiled that Indian origin people managed to reach Egyptian territory. That is, one group entered through the Horn of Africa and the other group entered through the Nile Delta. And that is why in the Egyptian civilization, we find two kingdoms, Upper Egyptian Kingdom and the Lower Egyptian Kingdom. Gradually, they converged and formed a united Egyptian dynastic rule and continued for several thousand years. Now, the fraternities which traveled from India actually adopted various animal symbols. These animal symbol at present is highly neglected subject and they are considered as totems, but I'm sure once the real significance of this animal symbol is appreciated, it will become one of the most important subject for discussion. Now, those fraternities which lived on the coastal region, they adopted species like fish, turtle, goose, and naga. And those fraternities which lived in interior forests, they adopted symbols like tiger, Hanuman, elephant, owl, and so on. Now, when they travel from one place to the other and establish their settlement, they often name their settlements after the name of these animal symbols. Like, as I've mentioned, Baghdad, Baglam, Bagran. I mean, even the river, quite often they have named the river also Tigris, which is also from Bag. Then the elephant fraternity established Gojo settlements, which is now known as Gaza Strip of Palestine and Giza of Egypt. And when they went to Turkey, they established Hati and Hattusa, two principal cities there. And their king was named Hattusili. Their empire was named Hittite. And when this Hati fraternity returned, or Hosti fraternity returned from the Sanskrit-speaking territory, their settlement in India was known as Hostinapur. Now, the Hanuman fraternity were known as Huns. And these names, these Indian origin names of these fraternities, and this animal symbol is a global language. So this is not given due importance at this stage, but I'm sure in due course, it will become a very important subject, because these footprints of these animal symbols will provide us very interesting information about their migration path. I have managed to create a flow chart of this animal symbol. This blue territory is the matriarchal territory, and this yellow territory or this brownish territory is actually patriarchal territory. And then which animal symbol converted into which, I mean, they often transformed into like Bag fraternity eventually adopted lion image. Primate fraternity were also known as Molla, and turtle fraternity adopted cow image. At a later stage during patriarchal period, it became bull. And then during the conversion of matriarchal to patriarchal is also detectable, because as long as they belonged to the matriarchal period, they preferred cow symbol as their ethnic identity. When they became patriarchal, they adopted bull as their ethnic symbol. Now, let us now try to understand if we can arrange the migration path by arranging the genetic identities. Like I have shown you a map of R1 Bravo genetic identities, when it is possible to arrange the migration path from Eastern India to Central Africa, in the sense that region, that is Chadic region, is also Urban Bravo, and they are Afro-Asian speaking territory. That is, they have an Asian component in their language. So where from that Asian language came? That came from India. So it is possible to actually arrange the migration paths by arranging the pockets of Urban Bravo present at every region. Like here, this is that map of Urban Bravo, which provides the pockets of Urban Bravo in different part of the world, in the global, amongst the global population. Now, when we connect these dots, we can actually establish the migration path. Now, if a genetic identity has reached from India to Africa, they will also take their cultural identity. Now, in 1794, Lieutenant Wilford wrote an 183-page article published from published in the Asiatic Researchers Journal, where he elaborately explained that various issues related to India and Egypt. But particularly, he mentioned that Nile River, in fact, this is the title of the article, that Nile River of Ethiopia, and of course that Nile River flows through Egypt, that was known as Kali River in ancient time. Now, this explains that Kali worshipping fraternity had reached Nile territory or Nile Valley at a very early period. Now we see other evidences also. It is interesting to note that Kali possibly manifested as Black Athena in ancient Greece and Black Madonna in the rest of Europe. In fact, I'm just coming back. I was there in Greece some time ago, a couple of months ago. I was surprised to note that the greeting there is actually Kalimera. I mean, whenever in the morning we used to meet people, they used to we used to greet us with that Kalimera. And there are a lot of evidences which I'm going to arrange in my next book, that the Kali worshiping fraternity probably spread to ancient civilizations, including ancient Greece. And the mother, and please note that here also there are symbols, animal symbols like Naga and owl is there associated with Black Athena. And then Black Madonna is over a period of time gradually merged with Mother Mary. And during when her baby became an adult, Christianity spread, which is a purely patriarchal and established patriarchal culture in the European region. Indian origin fraternities had spread to different parts of the Mediterranean region, but at a later stage, they had to come back. Majority of them, in fact, Indian origin languages were popular there as long as Indian origin people were there. And when they returned, those languages became extinct languages there. So, we can establish with genetic and other evidences that they returned from Europe as well as from Egypt, and the Sanskrit-speaking fraternities returned from Egypt, both by land route and by sea route, and Pali-speaking fraternities returned from Mediterranean region, and that is from Red Sea region as well as Mediterranean region. Pali speakers settlement, Pali speaking fraternity settlement on the Mediterranean region was named Palistan, which is now known as Palestine. Now, they at a later date, they also returned by sea and by land route. Now, here is that was the image of the land route reverse migration, and this is the sea route reverse migration. And we find territories like Hampi and then Gongaridhi or Chandraketugad, giving clear idea that they were, in fact, Kailash temple of Ellora, Goa for that matter, that is pre-Portuguese Goa I was talking about, that gives clear idea that they brought a lot of evidences which are Hindu elements, but they were completely new at that time in these regions. So they were quite unique. Even in Sri Lanka also, we find a lot of evidences, similar evidences, and also in Northeast India. So this sea route got continuous, and initially it came to west coast of India, but eventually it got extended to east coast of India, Bay of Bengal, and finally it entered through the rivers of Bangladesh to northeast India. Now here is a map which I managed to create, which establishes that the reverse migration Pali-speaking fraternity returned back to India, and they established 16 Mahajanapadas, which is mentioned in the Sanskrit, in the Buddhist and Jain scriptures written in Pali language. That indicates that they were Pali-speaking fraternities or Pali-speaking settlements. And these 16 Mahajanapadas in compiled form is not there in Sanskrit, indicating that there was a rivalry between the Sanskrit speakers and the Pali speakers. So obviously they had returned prior to 6th century BC, because they got recorded in the Jain and Buddhist text around that time, 5th and 6th century BC. Now here are the, it is possible to establish that the Pali-speaking fraternity had traveled first about 10,000 years ago, and their settlement on the Mediterranean region was known as Palistan, and from there they reached Egypt as well as to Greece. In fact, when I read a book titled India in Greece, there also the author E. Pocock mentions about that the ancient language of Greece was Pelasgian, possibly referring to Pali. And then the Sanskrit speakers actually traveled from Kailash. There were two routes. One route went straight to Anatolia and Eastern Europe. They were Sanskrit speakers. When they went from India, they were Sanskrit speakers, in the sense that there was no script. So this language was used in oral form. Whereas when they were written, the Pali speaking migration or fraternity migration took place much earlier, that is about 8 to 10,000 years ago, whereas Sanskrit speaking fraternities traveled about 6,000 years ago, and both of them returned around between 2 and 4,000 years back, which is known as reverse migration in the book. And the reverse migration from Europe is actually referred to as Indo-Aryan invasion or Indo-Aryan migration. It is very difficult to convince the whole world that actually the migration has taken place from east coast of India to the Mediterranean region, unless we manage to establish that with genetic evidence. Now, the genetic evidences which has emerged in the last 1 or 2 decades when it is properly arranged, or when it is arranged in a meaningful manner, that provides this information that actually the migration was post-glacial period migration took place from east to west. So unless we manage to establish with the genetic data that the migration was from this end to that end, it will be very difficult to convince them. But fortunately, the genetic data are in our favor. Now, what should we do to convince the rest of the world that Indian civilization is the oldest civilization and other civilizations were created by the Indian origin people? We should draw the attention of the global scholars towards the Andaman tribes still present in the archipelago. These Andaman tribes establishes that the pre-glacial period anatomical modern human fraternities continuously lived in India. We have to arrange their migration path and thereby give this explanation that when the sea level goes down due to lowering of the sea level, this huge landmass forms connecting it with Andaman, and that gave rise to this land bridge. And then we have to discuss about the emergence and submersion of the Bengal glacial coastal shelf. We have to explain each and every step that why did the migration take place, because the settled population on the Bengal glacial coastal shelf, because that landmass submerged, they had no choice but to migrate. Of course, some people settle on the Bengal coast, but some other people prefer to travel long distance. I mean, they only travel to distant land, and we should establish that post-glacial period AMH fraternities like R1 alpha, R1 bravo, and O haplogroup originated on the Bengal glacial coastal shelf. As the pre-glacial period, anatomical modern human lived here, like I have mentioned in Andamans. After all, babies are likely to be born where their parents live. This is the most important issue. Once this is accepted that the post-glacial period genetic identities are originated on the Bengal coast, then the world civilization would belong to Indian origin people. And finally, we should discuss that Indian origin fraternities, when they travel, they actually use these animal symbols as their ethnic symbols. And we had the skill, we have to notice that Indians have exceptional skill for stone cutting. And that in almost every ancient civilization, we find they created all the marvels, which are essentially stone cut structures. In almost every civilization, like in Egypt, like in Greece, they obviously, whoever has created this, they had exceptional skill in stone cutting and transporting these huge stone blocks from one place to the other. Indians were particularly good in this. I can show you 101 structures they had created. And as all of us know, majority of the temples of India are stone cut structures, and they are excellent, which gives a clear idea that Indians had indigenous skill of stone cutting. And particularly when we concentrate in temples like Kailash temple of Ellora, which is actually a megalithic monolithic structure, a single stone was cut in that manner. It gives a clear idea that this skill is unfathomable. This skill is the skill they had is unparalleled. I mean, nobody else had. Whereas in India, they kept on creating such stone cut structures, which gives an idea that Indians were particularly good in stone cutting and creating stone cut structures. And then we introduced color code. Not only we introduced animal symbols, we introduced color codes as well. And then we introduced terracotta. In almost all the ancient civilizations, we find terracotta seals, terracotta structures, whereas the terracotta still continues in Eastern India and in some part of India, whereas that terracotta is found only in the archaeological structures in the rest of the world. Rather, in the rest of the world, this presence of terracotta confirms that the Indian origin people, when they lived there, they created such terracotta artifacts, and when they withdrew, that art got completely extinct from those regions. And we introduced Pali and Sanskrit languages, which form the root language of many language trees. And it is possible to establish that Indian origin fraternities from Egypt or Red Sea region and Europe, they returned by land and sea route. And finally, Gangaridhi was a very militarily powerful kingdom, and even Alexander was worried about the military strength of this region, and probably because of that region he retreated. And once we establish that, automatically it will establish that knowledge of other subjects like astronomy, astrology, mathematics, philosophy, medicine, metallurgy were also it spread from here. We suspect this knowledge transfer from India to the West, but fail to establish them convincingly. Again, once we establish that these genetic identities travel from East to the West, all the other knowledge, culture, language will automatically travel with that genetic identity. Genetics is the most important issue where we have to concentrate. Here also in this map we can see, you can always see this map in Google. The moment you type R1 Bravo haplogroup, this is available in Google, in Wikipedia. Now here also you see that there is a patch of R1 Bravo. Now R1 Bravo concentration today is much more in Western Europe, but these pockets are very interesting because we have to connect these pockets in the migration path somehow. And in all probability, these pockets are the oldest R1 Bravo settlements. So these isolated pockets are now this perfectly matches this map. I'm not showing the maps of R1 alpha and R1 and O haplogroup because that will unnecessarily create confusion. I'm concentrating on this map for this lecture because this is giving the the issue I'm going to discuss here, or rather I'm discussing here, this map clearly establishing that we can discuss about other genetic identities in a lecture which will be based on genetic evidences, that what are the different genetic evidences which has emerged in the last 10-15 years and which are in our favor, and we have to establish those, or rather interpret those data in the right manner, so that automatically it becomes established that your post-glacial period migration took place from east to the west along with their language and culture. Thank you very much for your patient hearing. Jai Hind.